to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host Rob Sheply here. On today's episode, we got my good friend Jeff Brown on the podcast today. Jeff, it's great to have you on. I've been looking forward to this for a while now.
Yeah, Rob, likewise. I'm excited to be on the show. I think we've talked about the playoff ad nauseum. We've been waiting for it for a while, and it's finally upon us. And I'm excited to finish talking and see how it all plays out.
Yeah, especially too, like in our age, it was still the BCS championship, and seeing the evolution of college football happen. Now you have this 12-team playoff. You have 12 teams that I think in a couple different ways could possibly win the college football championship. But when you look at this Friday and Saturday, you have a couple of games that really kind of catch your eye, and a couple of games too that you sit there and say to yourself, man, this can really go either way. And as we look at this playoff picture, you start off on the left side, and the first matchup would be Tennessee versus Ohio State, with the winner playing Oregon. So what are your thoughts on the Tennessee-Ohio State game?
Well, I think this is one of those matchups where, it's been talked about ad nauseum, but I think weather could play a factor here. Obviously, Tennessee, it can get a little cold there, but I think when you look at them coming up, though, Ohio State, it's going to be cold. It's going to be a nighttime game. It's going to be a tough road environment. And in some of the research I've done on Tennessee here, and just from watching them throughout the season, the first time that I saw their offense look a little slow was in the game against Oklahoma, which, obviously Oklahoma had a down year this year, but I don't care what year it is. That's a tough road environment.
Right.
Obviously they came out with the win, but offense looked a little sluggish. And then obviously the offense struggled mightily in their loss on the road in SEC game against Arkansas. And then, their other loss on the road against Georgia. So I think the key thing here is seeing how the young quarterback, Nico, handles the pressure of playing under the bright lights on a big-time road environment. And I'm excited to, watch how that unfolds from the Tennessee side. I'd like to see what you think of from the Tennessee standpoint.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And we talked about this off camera too. Tennessee, I think about that really strong Alabama win, and obviously, Tennessee's been one of those teams where when they're on, they're on, and when they're off, they're off. I mean, you can go back and look at that Arkansas game where the offense has struggled a little bit here and there. But then at the same time, when you think about Ohio State, they quite frankly should have been in the Big Ten championship game. And Chip Kelly's had to answer questions all week about their game plan versus Michigan, and quite frankly, how they're going to come out in this game. Because we've said this before. I've said this on the show before. I think Ohio State is still the most talented team in the country. And at least in my opinion, the way I see this is that we should be seeing an Ohio State-Oregon rematch. And for it not to be the Big Ten championship, I mean, I guess it is what it is. But in many ways, Ohio State should be advantaged in this game too. But also, Ohio State and Tennessee are really close to each other too. So I would not be surprised if you saw an exodus of Tennessee fans also being at this game too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason this game was put at that 8 o'clock time slot, right, on Saturday night. This is probably the marquee matchup of the four for this opening weekend. It's going to be quite the spectacle. You did touch on Chip Kelly. Before I really get into Ohio State, I kind of wanted to see if you expand on that a little bit. I know you mentioned, earlier, I want to say it was last week, we had a quick conversation, and you felt like maybe Chip Kelly was being held back a little bit, just in terms of maybe some of his responsibilities and what they're giving him the freedom to do. I don't know if you want to get into that at all here.
Yeah, I mean, my big concern about going to the Ohio State-Michigan game is when you're playing against a team like Michigan, they have one of the best defensive lines in the country, and you were still insisting on running the ball every game. Now, it could be Ryan Day saying, hey, we want to send a message to Michigan since you've never beat Michigan before. Or it could just be that they just genuinely felt like that was the way to win. I mean, yes, you do have Henderson, you do have Jenkins, both legitimate 1-2 running backs, but at the same time, when you have a guy like Will Howard who's been relatively consistent here, and you have a bunch of offensive wide receivers and weapons that can beat Michigan, especially when you don't have Will Johnson here, to me, it definitely is a kind of a big question mark too, especially when you've seen Ryan Day over and over again not be able to make it to the national title game.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great points. The way I see it with Ohio State is I agree with what you had mentioned. I think they are the most talented team, top to bottom, in the country. I think if they play to their potential, they very easily could win the national championship. I also think they could lose Saturday night. I think, you hear people talking about, oh, are the Ohio State fans going to be booing their own team? Like, no, they're not going to start out in the first quarter and be, on the field booing about the Michigan game. They want to win a national title. But if Ohio State comes out slow and starts struggling, do those fans start to get a little antsy? Do you start to hear boo birds? I don't know. I mean, it. I think Ohio State, like I said, I think they're the most talented team in the country, and I think they should come out fast. But if they don't, who knows?
Yeah, and it's going to be one of those things too where I think part of just what's so fun about this playoff environment too is it's going to take a little bit too for things to be rolling too, in the sense of, hey, a lot of these kids have never been in this playoff sort of environment too. So I'm definitely kind of intrigued from that perspective too. And also all these teams got pretty much a full week to prepare for these games too. So I think the margin for errors is going to be so much different too. And also just the attention to detail and just all the teams just having very specific game plans going to these games too.
Yeah. Do you, just quick thought? Do you think that there's a little bit not an advantage for the road team, but with this being the first run here at the college football playoffs, do you think there are some extra nerves for some of these teams playing on their home field, first ever playoff game at home, want to come out, get off to a good start? I mean, is there a benefit in your eyes to some of these teams who are starting this on the road?
I mean, yeah, yes and no. I mean, you can argue in the sense of if if Tennessee, obviously everybody wants to be home, right? But
Yeah,
at the end of the day, I guess if you are Tennessee, you kind of have to double down on being the quote unquote underdog the entire college football playoff. So yes, I guess it does build some adversity in that sense too. But I would argue, if it were me, I think home field advantage is so much more important, especially compared to an NFL game, and especially when you get into the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, the Peach Bowl, and whatnot too. When those neutral sites are taken away, for you to be able to have that home game, it's just especially just even more important too.
I agree. I agree. I find it interesting, these young kids and social media. I feel like there almost sometimes becomes extra pressure on the home team. Not to jump to other sports, but we've seen so many times recently in different, various like game sevens of different rounds. It almost seems like there's added pressure sometimes on home teams. So I just kind of get your take there. Um, as far as picks for the game, I am picking Ohio State to win this game. I don't think that they come out and lose the second straight big game at the Horseshoe. I think they'll be ready to play. I think that this game for their coach, for them forward in the playoff. I think it's gonna be a close game, but I ultimately pick Ohio State to win here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I got Ohio State at least winning by 7 here minimum. To me, they're just a more talented team. I think they have a lot of seniors on this roster, and I think the one thing too is they've addressed how they can maximize their offensive line with the injuries that they've had to. Because obviously that's the one big question with them too, is to what extent can Will Howard be protected and how much can they run the ball too. And it seems like they've found ways to win despite some of those injury issues that they've had. But now you look